Welcome, Peggy Ployhar, to Empowering Educators. We're so happy to have you join this summit with your tremendous expertise in the field of SPED homeschooling. And in fact, that's the name of your business.
Yes, exactly. Thanks for having me, Jill. I'm excited to share. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to do that.
Well, I feel like your voice is very important and relevant as we look at the overall picture in education. And we're empowering educators partly through just understanding the choices. And homeschooling is one of our features, as that is a very valid option that increasingly people are turning to. And we'd like to especially understand it from your perspective. So without further ado, I know that you have a lot of information to share. I'd like to turn it over to you.
Sure. Yeah. All right. Well, do you want me to share my presentation?
I would like for you to tell us about who you are and how it came to be. And yes, help us to understand why it is important.
Sure. My homeschooling journey began not with me wanting to homeschool. And I know, Jill, you had been talking about, just why do people are making this choice? And it ends up that a lot of people that have children who are struggling learners and have special needs, oftentimes they will choose homeschooling not because it's their first choice. And so my story is very relevant to my community. My oldest was at a private school and he did not thrive there. He was actually in the principal's office every day. And the principal sat me down and said, I think there's something going on and you should have your son evaluated. And I thought, oh goodness, how did I ruin this child to get him to this point? I'm blaming myself because what else could it be? And the diagnosis of Asperger's came back, which now would be an autism spectrum disorder. But at that time, there was only 2 books that existed on autism spectrum and high functioning autism that we now call Asperger's. And so I had no idea what I was dealing with. And it was interesting that when I brought home that diagnosis and talked to my parents go, well, Peggy, that's you. And it made so much sense in my world that this was why I struggled with relationships and all of these things. And here, now I've got this child that does the same thing and I'm supposed to teach him because if I put him in the school, he was so depressed that he was ready to commit suicide at the age of 5.
Oh my gosh.
And so that was the rough beginning of our homeschool journey. And we've grown a lot. It's been 19 years now. But a lot of parents who enter homeschooling when they have a struggling learner, it's out of desperation, and very much similar to where my story started my homeschool journey.
We're so grateful for you to share it. You are a wealth of knowledge. And I know a resource for many now. And so please tell us about how that journey came to be, traveled.
Sure. Yeah. I had been in Christian leadership before I started homeschooling. I thought, that was my route. I was going to get my kids in school and then do whatever. And it ended up that as I had homeschooled a couple of years, really felt the draw to start helping other parents. I only was like 2 years ahead of them, but I was 2 years further than they were, and I had resources. And so I was offered a position with the Minnesota Association of Christian Home Educators, MSHE, in Minnesota, and was brought on as their first special needs consultant and just walked alongside a lot of parents, was on a lot of phone calls, emails, and getting parents resources. And when we moved to Texas, the Texas Homeschool Coalition then hired me to do the same thing. The problem is I found myself answering the same questions over and over and over again. And it was those desperation, this is not a drill. This is the real fire. How do I get out of it? And that's good that parents have resources. They have consultants that they can call for that. But I felt like once we got out of that, I had nothing to give them. I could point them to so many different websites that were changing all the time. And there was no consistent one place for these parents to go get the encouragement that they needed, the resources, the training. And so thus in 2017, I launched SPED Homeschool, which has been kind of that hub for parents to come to get all of the information that they need and the consistent teaching and encouragement, and know that they can do it.
And part of that is the building of community in that context, right? That they get connected not only with the information, but with each other. And
Exactly. Yes, they
understand
know they're not alone.
and that this is actually, not just raining on me, but we're in this rainstorm of a situation.
Yes.
And how do you address it? Are they finding success through the homeschooling? And what are the kind of resources that you're pointing them to?
Right. Yeah. So as soon as a parent realizes that there is no one size that fits all, that their child is extremely unique, and that is an awesome thing, but it also means that there is not this prescribed method to get them there. And it has to be very individualized. Once a parent grasps that and takes off with it, that is when the beauty starts to happen. And I have a whole talk on customizing curriculum that I do, and what I've done in the last 19 years with my 3 kids that are, of course, each very unique and different than one another. Um, and so a lot of parents will just find community that they create. That's what I ended up having to do for my kids. Larger homeschool co-ops and those types of things often don't work for our kids because classroom situations had never worked for them either. They need smaller groups where the social interaction is social and it's not related to a learning task, because they have to focus so much on that learning that they don't get the social skills, or the social skills go out the window because they're trying to focus so much, and there's just way too much going on for them. So like for my kids, I had 2 other families. They had other kids in their families on the autism spectrum. And of course, the siblings of those kids understood my kids, and my kids understood them. And we would just do activities together. We were what is now called, it was actually coined last year, throughout the pandemic, a pod. And it's just a couple of families that get together and do learning together. And so that is probably the most effective way for homeschoolers of struggling learners to have community. And then also just to do a variety of different classes that focus on what the student is really interested in or good at, like martial arts or woodworking, those types of things, where they can have those social interactions in a place where they feel like, ooh, I understand this, and this is what I'm excited about.
Well, so just to be clear, you homeschooled all 3 of your children all through the whole high school.
Yes, my youngest is graduating tomorrow. So I'm done homeschooling as of tomorrow.
Wow. Interesting timing.
Mm-hmm.
But in that pod, it was empowering to be with the other children, and it provided
Yes.
that social connection.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah.
This notion of customizing curriculum is a definite one of empowerment. And I wonder, will your presentation speak to that aspect?
A little bit, yes. I'm going to talk about flipping special education, and just like you flip a house, and the foundation in education and what we base all of our special needs instruction on, and why we need to look at it in a completely flipped and different way. And customizing curriculum is a major part of that, because we often think the curriculum is going to solve the problem of teaching the child, and that's not exactly true.
Well, we're eager ears for your presentation and your message. Is there anything else you'd like to say before leading into it?
It's just that, homeschooling, I know, is not the ultimate choice for everyone. There's certain family situations, other things that going on in family life and in education that families make a lot of different choices. And so we value that. Our resources are parent resources. So even people that use public schools and private schools, or maybe even teach within those systems, use some of our resources just because they tend to be more creative. And homeschool parents are known for their creativeness. And if they aren't creative, they get there, like I have. I started out as a very stuffy engineer. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, what a change.
Yes. I don't think I would have been wearing this loud of a shirt.
And just right off, tell us your website. So I know people are going to be wanting to contact you. What is your
Sure.
site?
It's SPED Homeschool, SPED homeschool.com. It's pretty simple, but that's just short for special ed and special ed homeschool.
Okay, excellent.
Mhm.
Well, please do begin and share with us your PowerPoint.
All right. I'm going to see if I can get this set up here.
And while you do that, I just want to acknowledge that beautiful award in the background is for being a transformational leader. I was so fortunate to meet Peggy at the Global Foundation for Education and Learning, where you did win that award as acknowledgement for the leadership that you've brought to this area of increasing need within our society. And as we understand and recognize, that population is growing, thank goodness for people like yourself that are, helping answer to it, and not just answering to it for yourself, but for others. It's really a mission-driven business, I can see. So thank you for the gifts you're bringing to this world.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm all right. So thanks for having me, Jill, and allowing me to share this information. This is just something that has been very close to my heart in talking to parents about, but I know educators too. Sometimes we don't understand the history of why we do what we do. And so I'm going to kind of dive into some of the history of special education. And then how do we take what's good about what we've learned over the years and what hasn't worked, and maybe replace it with some things that that we've seen work within the homeschool environment. Because I know when we met at the GFEL conference, I had a lot of parents come up, or not parents, but educators come up to me afterwards and say, you do in your homeschool what we have always dreamed of doing in our classroom. And so I'm hoping to inspire you a little bit with some of the crazy things I've done and just inspire you to flip maybe some of the long time, maybe unchallenged things that you've done. So, or maybe you are thinking of doing. Yes, exactly. So the first slide I'm going to share with you, I'm going to go through this really quick, but it was very convicting to me to look at the history of how special education started. We all have heard of the case of 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education. That was about discrimination. It wasn't about special education. But what happened when this case came about was parents who had special needs children started to create an uproar because they knew that their kids were left out of the classroom. It wasn't until 1965 then that the Elementary and Secondary Education Act came about, and it opened access finally to students with disabilities. And then in 1970, that was replaced by the Education of the Handicapped Act. And there were still no mandates that schools had to help kids with disabilities, but it was unconstitutional for the schools then to deny activities as well. So they could open their doors, and but there was nothing that they had to do. Not until 1975 did the Education for All Handicapped Children Act pass, and this was the first time when IEPs were introduced and students with disabilities were granted legal rights to education. I remember this year because this was my first year of kindergarten. And I remember there being news people outside of the school, and I had no idea what it was about. And so yes, that makes me 52. If you want to do the math, I'll keep you on track here.
Mm.
But then it was another 11 years later in 1986 when that was amended and it started making programs for toddlers and infants, and there was grants that happened there. And parents were finally allowed into IEP meetings. So that was in 1986. In 1990, then the IEP finally required parent approval. Before then, parents were just bystanders in that process. And also at that time, that's when the Americans with Disabilities Act was brought in, where we saw a change in just accommodations in public. In 1997, that was amended, and students now, they weren't sure if the programs were working. This is when we saw assessments introduced and transition plans. And then in 2001, the No Child Left Behind policies were created. And then in 2004, the IDEA, the Individuals with Disability Education Act, combined with the No Child Left Behind. And that's when we saw that students were now included in mandatory testing. So that has been only for 17 years that mandatory testing and testing requirements have been in place as trying to find a gauge. So, so just basing that, I use this picture because it seems like these laws, these policies are shouting at us that increasing the rules, increasing the reporting and requirements, and the necessity to show progress is how we gauge success. And it's done through early intervention, IEPs, standardized testing, federal funding, and reporting and mandates. And so we try to then create an educational system that has conformity with these. And we want to get rid of individuality, and we want to make students look like one another. We want the lessons to be delivered in the format that would meet everyone's needs, not individual needs. And of course, if you have a classroom with so many students, that's probably all you can do anyways. And we focus on learning styles that, of course, are easiest to teach, but also will hopefully be the same way that we test them. And then we focus on average because that's the goal. And the learning intelligence kind of get thrown out the window because that's not going to lead to better testing. The test is what we focus on. So I just want to quick go over some of these best practices. I saw an article from the Resilient Educators, who the article was written by, and they were talking about the best practices for a special education classroom. And when I went through, basically, it's to manage your class behavior, and test and label children, tell them what they do bad at so that they can work on it. And then try your best to figure out how to help them as much as you can at what they're bad at before they move on to the next teacher. So that doesn't leave a whole lot because that unfortunately, because of the policies and procedures and mandates that we have, this is the hole that many educators are stuck in, especially in the public system that is funded and run by funding. So if you're outside that system, I want you to consider that you have freedom to teach beyond this model. And that's where homeschoolers, and I talk to them, I talk about, you aren't mandated by any of this. Some of them are required to do standardized testing. A lot of times they don't even turn those tests into anybody. But if they do, there's still so much more proven results in not teaching towards the test. And this is why. So I'm just going to quick go into some of the things from my own experience. I talked earlier about how if I would have been diagnosed, I would have had the same diagnosis as my son. And school for me was a survival place when I was growing up. And I just thought with my son, we're not going to survive anymore. But I've seen this with a lot of other kids and stories from parents that I've consulted with over the years, and also personally, my parents. So I am the oldest of 14. That's a unique part of my story. I have 10 siblings, all that have been adopted with special needs. And
Wow.
so my parents actually started homeschooling after I did because they saw the success happening in my home. And actually, starting next year will be their last year, or this is the last year of homeschooling for them too. My mom just said, "I'm just so tired." So, but I have one sister, and her name was Kateri. She has now passed on, but she had anencephaly, and school for her was a babysitting um, venue, as my parents had said, because the teachers didn't know what to do with her. And even the brain surgeon that worked with her just felt like there was nothing going on inside. And my mom said, no, there is something going on inside, and we're going to figure out how to get it out. This is the way parents are. um, and so she had studied eye gazing and started doing some eye gazing techniques with Kateri, and found out that she did understand a whole lot and was able to communicate for many years before she passed on. And even the brain surgeon that worked with her was amazed that she understood as much as she did. And so we often, because we're so stuck in this pattern of how we teach children, we don't think a lot outside the box of, well, what is unique to this child? And I know the same has happened for many of my siblings who have fetal alcohol. A lot of these kids have bubbles in their brains, and we talk about neuroplasticity and trying to build those neural networks in kids, where kids who have been exposed to alcohol and drugs, they will misfire through those bubbles for many, many years, often 10 to 15 years longer than most children take to develop their brain. So they're into their late 20s to early 30s before they can make adult decisions. And so these kids just need longer amounts. They need lots of repetition. They have hard times with a variety of things. But again, if we're expecting them to meet mandates, if we're testing them by teaching them, the standard way, it's not going to allow the time that they need to learn the things they learn. And unfortunately, the fallout of a lot of this, of not customizing this education, is we have kids with depression, anxiety, performance fears. A lot of them suffer PTSD from their education experiences. They have self-image issues. They get bullied. And they get bullied because they're labeled, and we do the labeling. We segregate them, and the dropout rates are high, and they have very low transition readiness. An interesting case was done with kids who were at 2 different levels in a class after they tested. The teachers decided to flip the labels and tell the kids who performed high that they were the low achievers, and the kids that performed low that they were the high achievers. And you know what? By the end of that semester, they had actually switched places. And that is the effect of our education and the attitude that we have when we teach our kids, that can affect them for the rest of their lives.
Those messages, they're so important.
Absolutely. All right, so I'm going to get to my next slide here. Okay, so we need to demolish some things. I hope I've encouraged you in that. Joel Comm, from his book, The Fun Formula, says part of following a dream is having the courage to create your own model of action, to find your own way of doing things. And courage for me in demolishing my learning ideals, well, since I realized in my own life and in the lives of those I'd seen around me that there was really little successful outcomes in what I was being told to do. And also that they weren't founded on evidence-based outcomes. These were on political policies, classroom management strategies, and reporting mandates. And I didn't want any of that. Then I fueled that demolition by understanding that creating cookie cutter students for a world that is so diverse and needs diverse individuals is not going to bring about what our world needs and what especially employers are looking for. and also what God expects from me as a parent to train up my child in the way they should go. Then I redefine that demolition by looking for a more accurate perspective for my own kids. Do you know that my daughter, who's graduating tomorrow, will change careers at least 7 times in her life? That is what's predicted right now. If I only teach the facts to my daughter and I do not teach her what she's good at and help her to hone into that and teach her how to learn, I have failed her, because she needs to be ready to make those transitions and make those transitions well. We are no longer a knowledge-based society. We can find knowledge everywhere. What we need to teach our kids is how to find knowledge correctly and to be discerning with it instead of just memorizing a lot of facts. Some facts are good because they're foundation to how we make our decisions, but there's a lot of things that we teach kids to memorize that they really don't need to. And then also, what is their passions? What is their motivations? What drives them? What helps them to want to reinvent themselves and to move on? These are the things that help us to refine how we teach individually each different child, because they are unique. And then an understanding that each of our children have a different path. Success looks different for everyone. And that's the way we're created. And we can find hope in this is a journey. This is not just an end when they graduate from school that they're done. No, this is the launch into more learning and more discovery for the rest of their lives.
Mm.
So I'm going to take you on to some remodeling ideas. Do community your own way. And I talked a little about this with my pods, but even redefining a classroom. If you're in a classroom environment, how you use groups, how you help children interact with each other, and then reframe success. Again, this is not an end destination, it's a journey. And teaching a child to learn versus teaching a child to get something, a test correct, is more important. And then everyone has something to contribute. For each of my kids, when we would do a group project, I would pull out their uniqueness. My oldest was a builder. He wanted to build everything. So if we were studying a time, a history period, and there was something structurally that we could create in that time period, he was the one to go to. My middle one is an actor and has sort of a comedic sense to him. So he always had a room full of different things that he could throw on as costumes and, scripts to use. So he would always be called on to do the acting and to help with those types of things. And my daughter is the artist. So I would call on her for that. Not only was I showing them that they were good at this, but I was also showing their siblings. And you can show this in group environments too. This is the giftedness of your fellow classmate, of your sibling. And this is why they are important in contributing. Everyone has something to contribute. And so that's what makes and values diversity. And it happens within families, it happens within groups. And then also making projects flexible, because sometimes our students have circadian rhythms that don't agree always with our schedules. I found that I had to homeschool my teenagers starting at noon, because that's when they learned. I actually just interviewed a woman on my broadcast this week, and she said that her son's a night owl. So she ended up doing online courses for him in Australia because that's what worked for him. So you can be extremely creative if you have the ability to move your timeline around. Maybe kids, you've seen patterns in your classroom or you've seen patterns in your home. Grab onto those, use them, instead of saying, oh, this is when we should be doing this assignment, or this is when we should be doing this. No, flip your schedule around. Don't flip yours. Take advantage of that energy and that focus when you can. Follow rabbit trails. This is something I learned to do early on with my kids, because I learned when they were interested in something that they didn't have to be told to learn. They pursued learning on their own. Give them an extra assignment to take home with them. Tell them, you know what, when we're done here, why don't you just go do some research? And then maybe you can come back and tell all of us about that. We did that oftentimes at dinner time. kids would have an extra assignment and then they come back and at dinner and they tell dad about it and everything that they learned. So just lots of things, and learning is everywhere, as we know. And so take advantage of when you see something to stop and point it out instead of just passing by it because it's not in the schedule. We also have a lot of really uncommon building materials that we need to take advantage of in this remodeling process. We have communities, we have resources and people who have expertise that would be more intriguing for a child to learn from than from a book or even a video. So seek those people out that are passionate about what they do, because they're going to pass their passion on. Also, global resources. Since COVID, we have been able to access resources all around the world. Museums have allowed people to come in that have never been able to do that before. There's just so many things. Incorporating play. I interviewed Dr. Peter Gray, who has wrote a very famous book about the integration of play and learning. And he was talking about how much we miss that, especially when kids are younger, and it's detrimental to their learning later on. I interviewed a woman a couple of years ago. She had been an elementary teacher like 40 years ago. And in her training, she said, we were trained not to teach kids how to read till they could do bilateral monkey bars. There is some science to that, because the two sides of the brain can't talk to each other until you can do bilaterals on a monkey bar. So think about that. There's certain things that you are actually making harder for your students by not allowing them to play. And also, we want to work on being a teacher and moving into that role of guide or coach instead of the one who always gives the instruction, because our kids need to know how to get that information. And so we need to teach them that versus always giving it to them. And the more you can do that, again, that's going to help them to be more discerning with where they pull information, and then just how to pull that all together for themselves. And as my goal as a homeschool mom, the sooner my kids would teach themselves, the better, because that allowed my schedule to have a lot more time. And it's also easier when you're in a larger environment with more students. If you just have them all doing separate projects on their own, and you are the one that's checking in to make sure that they're learning, it can actually go a long way. And then customizing, and especially during the high school years, it just makes me cringe when parents talk about putting their kids into the public school because they want to just finish up at the high school. These are the best years to individualize education, because really your kids at that age have gotten the basics. Extracurriculars can become job skill platforms. They can learn more about themselves, can dive into things that they wanted to try that maybe they couldn't if they had a full load of high school work. So extracurricular activities, volunteering, starting a business. They can also not just have to move into college afterwards. What about working? What about going to a gap year? And we gave our middle son a whole gap year. He taught himself to play 2 different guitars. And he worked for me as a volunteer. He got to travel to Russia with me. And so he had a great year, lots of good experience in that. So just thinking alternatively, what are we actually preparing for? Are we just preparing for another series of classroom activities, or actually are we preparing them for life? And again, back to those 7 career changes. And then holding them back. My daughter actually had enough credits to graduate from high school 2 years ago. So the funny thing is about her graduating tomorrow is she's been done for 2 years. But I just told her, pick a date and let's just be finished with this. So anyways, but then I released my oldest actually a year before he turned 18. And because he was ready, he wanted to learn a trade. And so he learned a trade his, I guess, technical senior year, although he was graduated. And then he went on and went to college and got a degree in biomedical engineering. So the trade school and learning how to construct things wasn't detrimental to his ability now to be a biomedical engineer. It was just one of those extra things that he learned. And so just thinking about those, there's different ways to remodel education, and they may not seem so typical to you, but if you kind of start wrapping your head around the why that we've talked about already, it makes a lot of sense. And now we're going to just dive into a few more customizing things. Plan out to remodel. A lot of people think they need to stick with a specific methodology. I've learned that when I stick to a specific methodology, I get backed into a corner too easily. So I've become a very eclectic teacher. And so I can pick from a lot of different things, because not every methodology fits every child. Or every teaching situation. And I had to be willing to do a lot of prep work, just like DIYers, watch a lot of videos. And that's why we create so many DIY videos on our YouTube channel, is because parents do need to tweak and change, and they want to do it themselves. And so why not listen to some experts on how to do that and then implement them on your own? And then there's support. Surrounding yourself with other people who have the same mentality and don't look at you like you're absolutely crazy is really important. Like we were talking about earlier, is that you're not alone, but knowing you're not alone is what's going to give you the encouragement that you need to keep going. Enlist contractors. When we have projects, there's sometimes things that are a little too technical for us. So hiring somebody to do some tutoring, to do some therapy work, to develop maybe a section of curriculum that you want to do that you're not a curriculum developer, then find somebody. These are things you don't all have to do on your own. You can find people that love to do this and are gifted to do it, and ask them to do it. And that's just going to free you up for the things that you really like to do and that you like to teach. And then just expect that setbacks are going to happen. And just reevaluate. Well, why did it work? Why didn't it work? Maybe our materials need to be changed, or maybe we do need to bring in that expert, or I need to watch some more videos, and then move forward. You've learned something. Don't get upset at yourself that, well, this failed. No, it just means that it was one way, it didn't work. And like Thomas Edison says, then it took him a lot of those experiences to get to inventing the light bulb, and it's the same thing with us. And our clientele, our kids, are always changing, so we can fail a lot of times and still be successful in learning from our mistakes. And I promise the finished model is worth it. I now look at my 3 kids and what I've invested in them in the last 19 years, and I would never choose anything else. They each know what their giftings are. They each know what they're good at, and how to learn. They are hungry to learn. My kids are all still learning. They're either asking me for recipes, or they're coming into my kitchen and taking it over, or they're out connecting with a new social group, learning to teach themselves new skills. And it's amazing to watch, because it's now moved beyond me. I was the coach, and now I'm the spectator. And that's a great place to be. So this is just a little bit about us. I have a podcast called Empowering Homeschool Conversations. And then we have a variety of resources that we have for parents. So I'm going to turn it back to you, Jill. And yeah.
Wow. And just, you mentioned your YouTube channel. What is it? It's the name of your YouTube channel?
It's SPED Homeschool. So SPED and then homeschool. You can look us up. I think we have close to 900 videos now on there. It's a lot.
Wow. Well, I just want to echo that you gave such a wealth of wisdom, not only for SPED situations, but really for what would be so good for so many students these days, and parents as well. Yeah. And I just want to echo like the points that were really resonant that I'm hearing from other educational leaders. Success looks different for each, and the power of diversity, recognizing that we have a diverse society and we need to honor that diversity rather than try to have everybody look the same.
Mm,
Not just teaching facts alone, but teaching to the child. And I very
mhm,
much heard a conversation of the spirit of the child when you talked about what are they good at? How can you
mhm.
bring out those skills, noticing where their passions and their interests
Right.
lie? What is the why behind the
Mm,
reason for learning, both for you or for parents as teachers or teachers in general, and for the students?
mm,
Um, and just recognizing, what does your child enjoy, allowing others to applaud and see those talents and
mm.
validate them in that process, also uplifts the self-esteem.
Yes,
um,
absolutely.
Seeking to align with experts in the field when you need to, understanding
Mm,
there's tremendous resources even on the global level.
yeah.
I thought it was a powerful message to bring in the value of play.
Mm,
That was so interesting about that body-mind connection that you're
mm.
talking about. I think there's a lot of pushing, like get those ABCs and just
Right.
having that value to be and that time to
Mm,
explore and
mhm.
conversations that come around that exploration that
Right.
do lead into literacy.
Exactly. Yeah.
I also want to really acknowledge that piece about high school and how much freedom is earned by that
Mm,
time to be able to really start to tailor into your particular areas of talent.
mhm.
And it
Right.
sounds like your children are great examples of having gone through a successful educational experience where
Yeah.
they are now like, I mean, a biomedical engineer, that's a big deal.
Mhm.
That's a
Yeah.
very major job to have.
Yeah.
And what do they have to say about their homeschooling experience as they reflect
Oh,
back on it?
yeah. None of them have hated it. Well, that's good. My daughter, she was actually born into it. So she begged for books the week she turned 3 because her brothers were already being homeschooled. And so she tells me often, she goes, I'm so glad. I'm so glad you homeschooled me because she is just, yeah, a very unique child. She's an artist and she has 2 full credits in fashion design, and she actually has a pair of shoes that she designed that's being produced in Europe right now. And I mean, just the ability for my kids to explore their uniqueness and to have the time. Sometimes it's just time, and you think we're wasting this time. There's things not getting done, but when they kind of muddle in that self-discovery, it actually is extremely beneficial. You just kind of have to hold back as a parent because you're not seeing results right away.
And this is really so much about the power of freedom and
Mhm.
taking that power from within rather than just accepting overlay of power without.
Mm,
And
yeah.
it's very much a process that we're in that discovery of like, oh, I do have a voice and I
Mm-hmm.
do have thoughts and ideas, and how do I honor them,
Right.
both for my child and for me, no
Mm-hmm.
matter what the context of the school.
Right. Yeah.
And I just noticed, did your daughter, for example, as she is developing her artistry, did she work, when you're talking about trade skills, did she work with a mentor artist? Did you?
She's taken classes privately and at the local art school here. And she was actually asked to be an assistant teacher this last year. Unfortunately, she doesn't have her driver's license, so that didn't work out so well for her. But so we're working on that. But yeah, she's worked in she's done some work that people just hired her to create certain characters and things for video games, and just kind of done some custom work too. But yeah, she's worked with a couple artists early on that really poured into her and have really formed her style. And now she's actually looking for an apprenticeship because she wants to use her artistic skills as a tattoo artist.
Well, that's so interesting. Like that was the way in the old days was
Hmm.
apprenticeship with a
Yes.
master, right? And
Hmm.
that there's a lot of value in still honoring that
Yeah.
pathway.
Hmm.
Um, and then I also really liked how you just talked about understanding that setbacks happen. We are all in our own process of learning. And when we
Mm.
understand and empower and validate that approach to education, even for ourselves as
Right.
lifelong learners, then it makes us much more tolerant towards others
Mm-hmm.
and ourselves in the
Yeah,
process.
exactly. Yeah,
So thank you for so much wisdom. I
you're
think that
welcome.
you just have a huge amount to offer. I'm going to just put this back into the gallery view. Um, well, or not, I'm not sure. There it is. Wait a minute. And one thing I wanted to acknowledge is that, okay, so you gave us a lot of resources just through your website and then your YouTube channel. There will
Yeah.
be a link with your bio and headshot on our promotional material for Empowering Educators Summit to
Mhm.
a special page that you are offering freebies, right?
Yes, yeah, we do have a freebies page. If you were to go to our website and go under Get Homeschool Help,
We'll have this.
yeah, and you'll share the link. But we do have a free downloads page, and on there I have a variety of different things. We actually provide a template and guide for parents to write their own IEPs. And then we have museum checklists. There's lots of downloads from our partners, and then that is also where you'll find all my handouts for the talks, various talks that I give across the country and online.
Excellent, excellent. And just to revisit this one idea of customizing curriculum, because I think
Mhm.
there's going to be quite a few questions around that.
Yeah.
What would you like to say about that? Because often we just accept this is the rules, this is the way it's done, and
Mm-hmm.
perpetuate it. And that's kind of why we still are in the factory-based model of education in so many ways on the
Right.
mainstream. And can you just give us a lasting idea about owning our freedom to make choices and how we go about that psychologically
Mhm.
for ourselves through understanding our options?
Yeah. Yeah. We've got a meme that we used years ago that really resonated with a lot of people. And it's this: if you're so focused on the curriculum that you can't see your child, it's time to step back and refocus.
Mm,
The focus needs to be on the child. This is the child's future. This is the child's education. It's not a curriculum developer's idea of what your child needs to become or your group of children that you're teaching. You can use curriculum. It's amazing. It was written with purpose and intention and research, but it can be changed. You can grab little pieces out of that. It doesn't have to be used verbatim the way that it was written. And because each child is unique, and some of them are going to need to rush through, certain things. Some need to skip over. Some of them need to spend time repeating that for a long time. um, but allowing that individual perspective to be at the forefront versus whatever else is driving the education. The child needs to drive the education because this is what's forming them and their life.
it's so interesting because that's very much Montessori also.
Mm,
I had my career based in Montessori, and they say, follow the child, learn
mhm.
to observe and come from the
Right.
place and bring out the spirit within.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Mm.
that's very true.
Wow. Well, I just feel so grateful for your time and energy and wisdom. And
Yeah.
I'm
Thank you
sure
for
there's
having
going
me.
to be others as well that are so happy to connect with you and that you are accessible, you are available to share this wisdom. It's what you do. And we just say thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome. Yeah. Thank you for having me. I appreciated being able to share.
A pleasure. So we will say goodbye for that moment and take care with continuing to empower your education.